that, I'd like to acknowledge that we are exactly 19 years and 11 months on after the smoke-free legislation implemented on the 26th of March of 2006. And I'd like to just acknowledge the efforts and all of the role of Ash Scotland in that. And I wonder if you could just help me here and just acknowledge Sheila's efforts and everybody at Ash Scotland in the past and now. And it was a marvellous achievement. So, Sheila, everyone. So I'd like to have a wee bit of a focus now on second-hand smoke. I'm not going to mention e-cigarettes at all. I guess a lot of you out there in the audience may be saying, well, SHS is not something I experience anymore. It's not really anything of an issue anymore. So I'll explain a wee bit about the legislation. I'll then move on to having a discussion about the individuals that are still exposed and where that exposure happens, and have a bit of a discussion about all of the things that we now need to have as a focus on SHS. So all of you will be very much aware of this, of the legislation that arrived in on the 26th of March of 2006. At that time, I was interested in occupational exposures at that time, and I got involved in all of the evaluation of the law. And it was at that time I started measuring SHS, and I've never stopped. So that legislation arrived in. Then in 2014, we had mass media work in Scotland about SHS exposures in the home. And we had a national world-leading aim there of lowering, lowering numbers aged under 18 exposed to SHS in their own home. Since then, we've also had other lots of measures around smoking, either in vehicles or in other occupational environments. So you may ask if we've solved all of the issue of SHS exposure. And certainly the analysis I did back in 2016-17, so here we've got information out of the Scottish Health Survey, and on the bars there you see the fraction of non-smoking adults who have no measurable exposure to SHS. So this is with a sample of saliva, and we look at a marker of nicotine exposure. And as you can see, if you go back to 1998, it was actually very unusual that adults were not exposed. So only 1 in 8 adults had no evidence of SHS exposure. Obviously, that switches around markedly at the time of the smoke-free legislation, and it then edges up all the way up to a situation where we were at the 2016, where it would be 4 out of 5 of the non-smoking adults have no evidence of SHS exposure. Marvellous. Surely that would have edged up, and in essence, we're now at a situation where almost nobody's exposed. No. So we've just done this analysis over the last month, and the indications, as you can see, out of the last 6 or 7 of the years are that that has stalled in effect, and if anything, there's some evidence that more and more individuals are now being exposed to SHS. And there are still about 1 in 5 of the non-smoking adults are exposed to SHS in a day. So where are individuals being exposed? Well, a lot of that exposure is happening in the home, and that's something that we've really not heard anything about up to now. the evidence out of the Scottish Health Survey, it was first asked in 2012. It was asked about the rules around smoking in the home, and as you can see at that time, 75 out of 100 homes indicated smoke-free homes, essentially that nobody was allowed to smoke in the home, and that number has edged up. That's marvellous. We're now up to 90 out of every 100 homes is smoke-free, which is marvellous news. But it also means that there are still a lot of homes where SHS exposure happens. And also, if we now look at that evidence around SIMD, so if we look at the least affluent homes over on the left, SIMD1, we see that in the red bars, so that's the information out of the survey in the 2012, and the green bars are the survey last year. And the evidence is that certainly levels have lowered, and that's great news, but there's a much larger element of inequality now that exists in that exposure. So you're much more likely to experience that exposure now if you live in SIMD1 in the least affluent homes. But surely SHS levels in homes aren't as high as they were in bars if we go back to 2006. Surely levels there are not quite as high. Well, we've done lots of measurements in homes, and actually the exposures are at least as high, if not higher. And I guess the key thing is that we spend far more hours in our home than we do in other workplace environments or hospitality environments. Certainly, if you look at the graph there on the left-hand side there, we've got a blue line that lets you see the PM levels, the SHS levels, in a bar in advance of the legislation, and then after the smoke-free legislation on the red line, and obviously it's much lower there. But if you look at the average levels in that bar, they were averaging at about 700, 800. And if you look over on the right-hand side there, we've got measurements made in a home, and you can see that the levels are nice and low at night time, but averaging at about 600 or 700 over that day. So the levels are often higher than we measured in the hospitality industry way back in 2006. And it's not only homes. So really good work last year, big survey from Ash in England, examining occupational exposure. So a survey of over 8,000 individuals, and 1 in 5 of the workers indicate that they've been exposed to SHS at work as well. So we've done a lot of work around the SHS exposure of individuals in the NHS who are involved in the visits into homes of individuals that smoke. And as you can see there in the graph, we've got examples there of high exposures as the individual enters into homes. Certainly, there's lots and lots of evidence that these workers are exposed, certainly not in every home, but in many homes that they visit. And all of the guidance that's available, all of the guidance out of the RCN is that smoking ought not to happen for up to 1 hour in advance of that visit, and that's very much outdated now, as we know that SHS lingers for many more hours than that. So we've heard a lot about outdoor environments. We've heard a lot about the expansion of smoke-free to outdoor settings. And I'm going to be a little bit argumentative now, and I'm going to say that actually, if we look at where exposure happens and where most harm occurs, if we add up all of the SHS that is inhaled into the lungs of non-smokers in Scotland, we see that almost all of that exposure happens in home environments. And next to none of it happens either in the work environment as a result of legislation or in outside areas. And a very small amount of it still happens inside of vehicles as well. But most of that exposure is happening in homes. And none of the focus of legislation is on that SHS exposure that's happening in homes. So, I guess that's my halfway mark in my slide, so I'm just a little bit late here, Bev, but I might need an extra minute or two. Yeah. And I've now moved on to somebody else's slides, because that's not my slides. Yeah. So let me just see. Yeah, okay, good. So I think that was one of your slides, Andy. No idea how you got in there, yeah. So anybody that was up earlier on in the OCL, we had a really good exchange all about the bill, and it would be all about the powers in the bill. Obviously, there's a four-nation approach at the moment, but as we heard a number of months ago, there certainly is not going to be an expansion of the smoke-free environments, at least in England, around outdoor hospitality spaces. That is something that hopefully we will explore up here in Scotland instead, because there's certainly evidence of that occupational exposure happening. Many of those, of the 1 in the 5 of the workers who are exposed to SHS are exposed in that sector. And that's something I would like us to have a wee bit of a think about. But also, there are some lines in there in section 7 that would allow us to have that if a home is being used as a workspace, or if individuals are entering into that, and if they're doing work, then it could be looked upon as a workspace, and therefore it would be under the extension of the smoke-free spaces under that legislation. So that's something that is exciting and hopefully will happen either at the end of this year or next year. Also, the World Health Organization, we heard earlier on in the very opening slides that 157 of the 1,000 deaths in Europe happen as a result of SHS exposure. And that's something I think we've lost sight of. But at the end of last year, a number of the forward-looking measures out of the World Health Organization were announced. And the last of those measures was very exciting indeed, in that it advised that nations ought to look at an expansion of smoke-free environments, and also that should be looked upon in homes and also in vehicles. Another item of evidence that we had is excellent. It was at the end of last year again, in the autumn of last year. So the second item that was listed here under the 5th edition of the ECAC is that individuals ought to have a smoke-free environment at home and in their vehicles. I'm not going to go into this an awful lot, as I'm aware of the time, but just to say that there's also the option of novel sort of laws looking at selling of your home and indicating that there's been SHS exposure, smoking or e-cigarette in that home, and that's been advised over in a state over in the US. And that's something that we could also explore here in Scotland as well. So the last thing I'm going to have a wee bit of a focus on, and I'm expecting an audience looking a bit like this up on the screen. So I've been saying this now for 9 years, but how about we be bold, and how about we say that we need legislation that says that smoking in the home, if there's somebody under the age of 18 in that home, is illegal. It's not legal it's not legal to expose anybody to SHS in the workplace. It's not legal to expose anybody to SHS in bars, hospitality, etc. So why is it legal to expose those with extremely vulnerable lungs in their own home? Levels of knowledge now. Everybody knows about the harm of SHS. It's hard to argue that we need yet more education on this. There's lots and lots of evidence around now of high levels of knowledge. I'll focus on the second last line there, in that if you've got an individual that lives along with a smoker at home and smoking is allowed in that home, if you make that home smoke-free, the exposure and the dose of that individual off to PM will go down markedly. So we have lots and lots of focus on exhaust emissions out of many vehicles. We've got the LEZs in many of the cities, and we would have far more of an impact on these individuals that live in the home of a smoker if we made it smoke-free. Great, thank you, Bev. So I'd like to just also emphasize that there are very high levels of support as well. So it would be, in my world of academics, in my world of the policymakers, in your world of boards, NHS health boards, it may well be that we think that there wouldn't be an awful lot of support for a ban like this, but actually the evidence is that 68 out of 100 adults in Scotland would say that a ban on smoking in the home, if there's somebody under the age of 18 in that home, that ought to be acceptable. And very low levels, only 1 in 6 adults say that that wouldn't be acceptable. So I think that there is almost a fear of the Daily Mail headline and the idea of the nanny state, and yet most adults are of the view that that would be acceptable. And it's exactly the same. We've done some work last year along with the Young Scot, and it's exactly the same if we ask individuals aged, it would be 15 up to 19 on this. And I'll just skip on this slide here. So this is asking about a ban in homes. And as you can see, nearly 4 out of the 5 of the Young Scots would like to see rules or a ban around smoking in the home if there's somebody under the age of 18 in that home. So one of the last things I want to just say is that SHS exposure in smoke-free homes is not only about the exposure of non-smokers, it also helps individuals to stop smoking. There's really good evidence out there that if you can implement a smoke-free home, that makes it more likely that you will smoke less. It makes it more likely that you will stop smoking, and it also makes it less likely that if you stop, that you will experience anything of a relapse. So really good evidence that having smoke-free homes also helps smokers stop as well. Last slide, I think, second last slide maybe. So just to summarise then, Scotland has done extremely well over this last 19 years and 11 months. But 1 in 4 of the non-smokers are still exposed, and about 1/10 of homes still allow smoking indoors, and that's 1 in 5 in SIMD1. Also know that 1 in 5 of the workers self-report occupational exposure, and we know that most SHS in Scotland is inhaled in the home setting. I'd also like to emphasise that those that work in the NHS that need to enter into the homes of individuals that smoke experience SHS exposure. So let's make sure that we use the anniversary next month in order that we celebrate how well Scotland has moved on in this area, but also to acknowledge and accept that we still have a long, long way that we need to go on this issue. And my last slide is just about SHINE. So it's the Smoke-Free Homes International Network that we launched about a year ago now. And if anybody's interested in research or work around smoke-free homes or SHS exposure in the home, then sign up, please. That's great. Thank you.